Hello to everyone who are watching and listening. I am Ali BALCI, the Deputy Director of the Middle East Institute, and thank you for joining us in this wonderful occasion. In this panel, we host Michael Provence, a leading historian on the post-Ottoman Middle East. Let me introduce our guest briefly. Michael Provence is professor in the Department of History at the University of California. He teaches modern Middle East history, focusing on the 20th century. In addition to many scholarly articles, he is the author of two books, The Great Syrian Revolt and the Rise of Arab Nationalism, which was published in 2005, and The Last Ottoman Generation and the Making of the Modern Middle East, which is published in 2017. And as he told me, this book will be appeared in Turkish soon. Professor Provence will talk for almost 20 minutes, and following his speech, we will have a Q&A session lasting around 10 minutes. Now I am moving the microphone to Michael for his speech titled Thinking About Ottoman Middle East After a Century. Okay, Michael, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here and to address the conference. I wish we were all together in Turkey, because I should say that it's my intention to become, my dream of becoming a Middle Eastern historian began in Turkey about 32 years ago, and it's my love of the country and its culture and history that got me started. Those decades ago, I fell in love with Istanbul and the history of the city, Ottoman history, and this love began, it bloomed really in long walks from all the neighborhoods, the old neighborhoods of the old city in Istanbul and Beyoğlu and all over really, and so it was because of those walks, those long walks, that I became a historian of the Middle East. And so I wanted to organize my comments today, my remarks, around the idea of taking a walk, through a great Ottoman city. And so I wanted to address the topic of my speech, my talk, and the conference, thinking about the Ottoman Middle East after a century, by asking how we can imagine a person of 1920 would experience a walk in a great Ottoman city in 2020. So how the city and the experience and the feeling would differ after 100 years. So I want to imagine with you together a 120-year-old Ottoman citizen who we will take as our friend, as our companion on a walk through a great Ottoman city. And what that person would experience, what we could see through his or her eyes of the great Ottoman city after 100 years. And we can ask, what would be familiar from a century ago? And what would be unfamiliar? And we can ask, how would the Ottoman Middle East be today different, perhaps, than it is as we discover it, as we experience it, if the Ottoman Empire had not been destroyed, for example, as if the partition plans of 1916 and 1917 and 1918 had not taken place. And we can see, and I want to show, I hope, in some ways, during the course of our walk, things that have been ignored or forgotten or erased about the Ottoman city and the efforts of its people to build the city, to build an environment, a place for living, and the way that their works and the things that they did, cared about, and attempted live on after 100 years. So we can't talk to a person who was around in 1920, but we can still walk the streets that they walked, and we can smell the smells that they smelled, and we can see the houses they lived in, the schools they attended, the mosques or churches they went to, and the things that they felt can somehow be felt. We can feel them too. So there's a lot of cities that we could choose for our imaginary walk with our 100-year-old friend. We could go through many cities, many Ottoman cities that might be familiar. We could walk through Istanbul, Edirne, parts of Ankara, Adana, Konya, Damascus, Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antakya, Salonika, Sarajevo, and other major towns. Some, like Aleppo, Homs, Mosul, maybe Baghdad, would be too sad, too tragic, too painful to bear. And our friend, our guide, our 100-year-old companion would be unable to bear the pain of seeing the destruction of these cities. And we would feel that pain also. And we might find cities like Beirut or parts of Ankara or Istanbul destroyed not by the stupidity of war and the destructiveness of modern weapons, but by the capitalist greed of land speculators and people who destroyed parks and green spaces and public areas, and flattened treasured buildings with hundreds of years of human memories and experience to build concrete and steel towers and make money and make everyone, all of us, poorer by this greed that they displayed. And if we talk to a citizen of Jerusalem in 2020 or in 1920, we might find that for a Jerusalemite, for a person of Quds, of Jerusalem, the defeat of the Ottomans, the end of the Ottoman state in December of 1970 was the greatest catastrophe they could imagine. The end of 400 years of Ottoman rule over Jerusalem, a disaster. And if we went and talked to a Jerusalemite today, they might say that 100 years later, in December of 2017, when the Americans finally acknowledged and accepted and stopped protesting the full Israeli occupation of the city by the moving of the embassy, was another catastrophe. So these things are linked, we can say. And what we would find if we, I'm trying to share my images now. Let's see if I can do it. Can you see those? Ali, can you see the images?
Not yet. I'm waiting for it.
Let's see. Let me see here. Perhaps we can. Yes?
Not yet. It takes a little bit time to appear on my screen.
So as we walk through our Ottoman city, and for my purposes, I want to choose Damascus to share and to walk through, to have our walk through Damascus, because this is, of course, the Ottoman city that I know best and the one that captured my heart the most, and was a great Ottoman city of many centuries, of course. And if we visited with our friend, we would maybe disembark from the train station and in the Hijaz Railway, and we would find refugees from the Great War everywhere, and people who were suffering and hungry and homeless everywhere, and peasants and farmers and villagers who had fled the onslaught of the Great War, the campaign in Palestine, and were flooding the cities, coming into the cities to look for places to shelter and to eat. And so in 1920, this was the experience, and in 2020, it's the experience. And so the presence of these people, of the refugees from war, would be familiar to our friend as he walked. And of course, Ottoman Syria was full of refugees even before this, from the 19th century, from wars in Russia, the Caucasus. There were Circassians, there were Cretans from Greece, from the islands, who were expelled. There are towns in Damascus, in Syria today, that have Greek-speaking Muslim refugees, the descendants of refugees. So there's neighborhoods in Damascus named for the 19th century refugees, Muhajirin, Shirkis, and Akrad. And of course, in 1920, there were Armenians and Assyrians as well. And so 100 years, the trauma of war, displacement, the famine of 1917 was familiar. The hunger of people who didn't have enough to eat and were stricken by disease. And then, of course, the influenza pandemic of 1918 was familiar. So we have this 100 years between the influenza pandemic of 1918, which began at the end of the Great War and killed millions, tens of millions, including perhaps 10–15% of the population of Greater Syria, people who had survived the war and survived the famine and perished in the flu, in the influenza. We had in 1920 and today injustice and silence and suppression of intellectuals and people who challenged the colonial settlement by France and Britain. And for this, were sometimes put in prison, exiled, silenced, dismissed from jobs in public instruction in what had been Ottoman schools and universities, and banned from their livelihood for challenging the government, the colonial government. So can you see the maps yet?
Not yet, because I put some info in talk section. You can check it if you are able.
Let's see.
At the below of the screen, there is a button, present now. You can click on it.
Captions.
Yeah, move your mouse at the below. You can see present now button.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay. Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible. That's right.
Okay. So we have some images here that I'll mention. This is Walayat Halab here and Walayat Syria, Ottoman maps. Now, these are refugees in Syria in 1925 from the French invasion and destruction of Damascus. This is Damascus under French bombardment, the neighborhood of Midan outside the city. This is the city about 1930. And as we walk with our friend, we may disembark in 2020 from, there's no trains going to the station any longer. And the station still exists here, and it looks like this, but it doesn't receive trains. So we'll get out of a taxi and we'll walk along. And our friend, our 100-year-old friend, will be unlikely to get lost because the things that he remembers. Here's another picture of the train station. I think you can see my cursor. Can you see all this stuff, Dr. Ali?
Yeah, we can see. I check YouTube. We can also see from the YouTube as well.
So we'll walk like this, and we'll come along this street, which this image is from probably about 1917, shortly before 1920. And we'll find in 1920 anyway, a coffee shop here. It's still there. It's called Ahwe Hijaz. And we can stop and have a coffee there. Our friend will be familiar. We could walk up the street this way and we would see the Ottoman Teacher College over here. This one right here in this building. And we could go to the Tekiye Suleymaniye here, this mosque made by Sinan Mimar, and the Ottoman Syrian University here, the Hamidiyya barracks here, which is now the law faculty of Damascus University. But we would walk along this street. This street is called Sharia Nasser today, but it used to be called, for 60 years, Jamal Pasha Street. And we'd walk down the street and we'd see, this is another picture of the street along here. We'd pass on this area here, another important school where people like Fawad Shihab, the Lebanese prime minister, president, was educated. Mustafa Kemal Pasha, except for he wasn't a pasha, he was a captain, was a teacher there. This was the Ottoman military high school here. And we would walk along the street. This was an urban renewal project by Jamal Pasha. And the street, you can drive it today. It's wider, there's fewer trees. And at the end of the street right here, you'll come to the Souk Hamidiyya. But before we do that, we can make a left here and go to Sahat Merje. And we'll see there the tower that commemorates the Ottoman telegraph service as it extended to Damascus on this giant iron telegraph pole. And we'll walk around and we'll see the municipal sarai, which is still there and is the interior ministry today. And we'll see the square and this building here, which was the headquarters of the Hijaz Railway, the Ottoman rail service. And our friend would know that the telegraph wires and the electrical wires that were around, he would understand what these were for because the city was electrified. The Ottomans, the Damascenes had electric lights before the end of the Ottoman Empire. And we would walk now. This is 1917. These are probably German troops. This is the opening of the Souk Hamidiyya, the famous covered market, which is still exactly as it appears here, except for there's cars here. And there's a statue of Salahuddin Ayyubi here, not this nice kiosk, which to me is more beautiful. And we would walk down through the market, and it looks like this. And our friend would find this familiar. And the culture and the discussions and the tea that the merchants would offer us would be familiar from 1920 until now. We would know this. He wouldn't like the cars. They would be frightening. He wouldn't like the exhaust fumes. But once we were in the souk, in the bazaar, and we were smelling the smells, it would be familiar and something that we would know. And he would walk along. And
Dr. Michael, we have 2 minutes left.
Okay. And he would say, I think we need to have something to eat, or a sweet, or a halawiyat. And we would walk down, and we would stop at the famous ice cream store, which exists until today, and is known by every Syrian, Buza Bakdash, it says here. And this shop is a 19th century shop, and the ice cream is still served. And all of those Ottoman officers and all of those people who visited would know this from the 19th century. And so we would go and we would dine and have a buza, an ice cream in the shop. And then we would continue walking, and we would get to the Umayyad Mosque, which of course was rebuilt under one of the last Ottoman sultans, restored, improved, and constructed. And the notice of this remains until today. So war and trauma and refugees would be familiar, but Ottoman culture and structures and things familiar would also remain. And it's the case that the traumas and the famine and the pandemic and the suffering and misery of a century ago, people eventually recovered and they rebuilt. Human folly, violence, megalomania, and stupidity caused endless misery then and today. But the same characteristics of generosity and rich culture and food and kindness and human decency and love of one another and strangers gave people the strength to rebuild and to overcome the misery if they could recover. And so from then until today, there was hope and a possibility of the resumption of a rich, shared culture that united all of the lands of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, for your speech. And we have a question. I'm going to read it because it's a written question. I assume it is from a good reader of your studies. And it says, we know that you are a big fan of Syria, and especially Damascus. After the 10 years of civil war, which is still going on, do you have any hope for Syria as a state united, stable, or respectful of civil rights, at least a certain level? There's a question about the current situation.
Well, this is a difficult question. I have hope because, for the reasons that I've described, because I think that as a historian, we can say that the suffering of today is not unique. And the misery, I'm sure that if we were to go and talk to this person of 1920, it would be hard to have any hope for the future. But as I say, the city and the people who live there recovered. And, we have a terrible century. it began terribly, and it's ending terribly. But in the middle was hope, and I think that there will be hope again. And I have a lot of faith for the, as I say, for the culture and the richness and the history of the people who live there. And I think that the reservoir of human potential is very deep. And so, you know, I hope that that in 100 years from now, people would be able to take this walk that we've just taken in real time, not imaginary, perhaps, and recognize things that were still there, and things that people did to rebuild their city and their society. This is my hope, and I have hope. So I hope this is some kind of answer.
Thank you. Yeah, we have just 2 minutes. If you have some closing comments, and we can hear them now.
Well, I think that actually the question that this participant conference summarized what I had to say in a lovely way. So, I mean, I think that, you know, we can decide we can decide to have hope. We have to decide to have hope, because not having hope is too depressing and too miserable. So I'm looking forward to returning to Damascus, visiting my friends, the ones who are still there. I hope I can return with people I love who have left, and we can take these walks and enjoy the city and see familiar sights and smells again. So, and in the meanwhile, there are many other Ottoman great cities that, you know, we can.
Yeah, we share those good wishes with you. Thank you, Dr. Michael, for joining us, for sharing your thoughts with us, and hope to see you in the next time in Sakarya. Okay, thank you
very much,
again.
Radi.
Have a good day in
Thank
the
you,
US.
you too. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, thank you.